Welcome to the Bowel Chronicles, where we dive deep into the world of bowel health. I'm your host, Nikki Kilpatrick, and on this podcast we have raw and candid conversations with individuals facing various bowel conditions and illnesses. Through personal stories and shared experiences, we illuminate resilience and courage in the face of adversity. Be reminded that each story is personal and unique. These conversations are not to be taken as medical advice or to replace guidance from a doctor or healthcare provider. Our aim is to inspire and empower through these amazing stories, amplifying voices often unheard. So join us as we embark on this journey together. Sit back, listen, and be inspired. Enjoy the episode. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Bowel Chronicles. I'm your host, Nikki Kilpatrick, and today I'm joined by the lovely Aimee in Northamptonshire. Aimee, it's great to have you take time out of your day and come along and share some of your journey with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm very excited.
Yeah, I know we've been chatting behind the scenes there, but Aimee, your story is very, very different to what we kind of normally air here on the Bowel Chronicles or what we have so far. I've
Yeah.
previously had people on who have had maybe an ileostomy with maybe a urology problem, with a problem with their bladder, and
hmm
they would have a suprapubic catheter, or they might actually have a urostomy. Your story is Fowlers Syndrome, and
Yes.
you've been living now with your urostomy, your stoma into your bladder for the last 6 months just.
Yes. Just almost 6 months coming up to it.
Wow. Aimee, how old are you?
I am 23.
So you're not very old to be living with this stoma into your bladder. Why don't you start us off? Take us back and share. I know a little bit about Fowler syndrome, but not an
Mhm.
awful lot. Tell us how your diagnosis came about. What was happening throughout your life up until like how you got your stoma? Don't worry, I'll interrupt and maybe ask questions, but kick us
You're
off with
fine.
telling us a little bit.
Um, so since I was little, I've always had very complex health issues. I had a stroke at birth, and kind of that had caused cerebral palsy from what we knew as a base level. So I was kind of always backwards and forwards between consultants and different specialities. As I got older, I developed a lot of bowel issues and then gynae issues. And then just after my 21st birthday, so it was in April, my birthday's in December. I had gone for a day trip to London because a singer that I really like was doing a meet and greet. So I was like, oh, I'll take a trip to London, have a good day out. But that morning, I didn't go for my morning wee. Obviously, when you wake up, you always need a little wee. I didn't do that, and it was kind of out of the normal, but I didn't really think anything of it. I had gone to London and, you know, I still hadn't weed, so I was kind of like, oh, I'll keep drinking, maybe. I just need to drink more. So hours go on, hours go on, still not having a wee. And
And
it
was there any sign, like, did you feel bloated? Did you feel uncomfortable?
Um,
Or
to
was
begin
it?
with, no. To begin with, no, I didn't really feel anything. I didn't feel like I needed a wee, which was very strange. Kind of prior to this happening, I'd had a couple urology problems over the years, kind of like I had incontinence from a younger age.
Mhm.
A couple months before, I had a spell of kind of incontinence, so kind of the flip side of things. And then I kind of had a couple of days beforehand where my bladder didn't seem right, but I didn't really think too much of it. So kind of as the day went on, no, I didn't have any pain, I didn't have any discomfort, I didn't have the urge to wee, which was again very strange. It wasn't my normal. And it got to about 5 o'clock and I just was really unwell. I started feeling really dizzy. I started to feel very discomfort. I had a lot of pain kind of go on kind of in my lower abdomen, so kind of where your bladder is, I suppose. So my family were like, Amy, just come home. So my partner's mum picked me up from the train station and she took one look at me and she's like, Amy, you look awful. You're really pale. And I basically said to her, I was like, Laura, I can't wee. Like, I don't know what's going on. So I went back to their house and I was like, I'm trying to keep drinking, but you know, like kind of the theory of like you break the seal when you drink, when you go out drinking. I was kind of
Mhm.
like, oh, can I break the seal? And it wasn't working. So I tried running a tap. I tried getting into a hot bath. I tried having a shower. Nothing was working.
You actually physically set yourself on the toilet to go to have a wee, and nothing was happening.
Nothing going outside. Tried to obviously kind of strain.
Mhm.
Nothing was happening. I was just in a lot of pain and kind of, the typical things of like, oh, running tap or hot water, kind of typical things that you try and do to have a wee, and nothing was helping, nothing was working. So I ended up going to A&E. I'll be honest, I didn't really think too much of it. I've had so many health problems, and I was just being a bit naive, and I was just like, ah, it'll be fine. And my family was like, no, Amy, this is not normal. You need to go to the hospital. You can't wee, you need to wee.
Mhm.
So I'd gone to A&E, and they ended up draining a litre out of my bladder of wee. And I believe for a female, the typical is about 300 to 400 mils, your like full capacity. But mine was at a litre. So I was fitted with an indwelling catheter, but I was just kind of sent on my way. No explanation what was happening. I didn't know. I had to look up myself about the fact that I needed to use a night bag because I just kind of fitted it, and I was sent on my way with a goodie bag of supplies. But I was just like, I don't know what's happening. I'm a 21-year-old. Like, it was all very overwhelming. No one was really answering questions. I was supposed to be kind of referred to district nurses, but they didn't send the referral, and it was all very hectic.
Nobody was taking responsibility as such.
Not really. A&E had just done that kind of basic of, oh, your bladder was full, we're going to fit a catheter, but kind of no explanations otherwise. But it was really weird timing. So 3 days after I went into retention, I was having my endometriosis like investigation laparoscopy. So first time people were like, oh, it's likely you've got endometriosis on your bladder. Surely that's causing the problems. And I had my surgery and I did have endometriosis, but it wasn't found anywhere near my bladder. It was on my pouch of Douglas. So it was an explanation to my bowel problems I've been having for a good amount of time. But my bladder wasn't affected. So we were kind of like, oh, not sure what's happening here. So I'd spoke to my gynecologist and he'd said basically there's this condition called Fowler syndrome. We think you could have that. So I was sent to have urodynamics testing. But it had to be done at the private hospital near me because they didn't do it at my local hospital. It was just covered under the NHS. So I had that done, and they didn't do the full urodynamics that Leicester needed. They just did kind of your basic urodynamics. And there's,
Do
sorry.
you fill your bladder and empty your bladder?
Yeah, yeah. So they put different wires kind of everywhere, and it's to see how your bladder reacts and the pressures and everything else. And I believe there was one that goes up your rectum. There's one that goes up your urethra, I think. There's like a few different areas. I can't remember. It's been it's been a little while, but I had that done, and the doctor himself didn't believe in Fowler syndrome, which was concerning. He just said, "Oh, it's just a throw about diagnosis. It's nothing." But my urodynamics showed that my bladder had failed, so my detrusor muscle wasn't working.
Okay.
And I got to 600, and I believe they stopped at 670 mil, but I had no bladder sensation, so I didn't feel my bladder. I didn't feel the urgency.
Mhm.
I had a bit of back pain, but other than that, just my bladder wasn't working. So my gynecologist said, I'm going to send you to Urogyne to begin with at Leicester. He taught me how to self-catheterize,
Mhm.
which in itself was a big problem. That was not long term. And yeah, it just kind of snowballed from there, really.
Okay. So 21 years of age, you were sent home with this indwelling catheter, no one taking responsibility. Then eventually they do the urodynamics, mention Fowler syndrome, and then they go down the avenue of we're going to teach you to self-catheterize.
Yes.
Really isn't. Is it an answer? Is it a sticking plaster? Is that a temporary thing or?
I think it was more of a sticking plaster. No one really knew what was going on, and no one really knew whether my bladder was actually going to start working or not, which was kind of the concerning part. Will it just miraculously start? Will it continue like that? Some people with Fowler syndrome do have kind of fluctuating symptoms. Sometimes their retention's really bad, sometimes it's not as bad. Some people get like kind of overflow incontinence with Fowler's. There's a lot of different ways people can kind of go with it, but mine just didn't improve. In the end, the self-catheters were getting stuck, so I couldn't get them out, which was very painful, and kind of that led me down the road of, because of my urethral spasms, which is a part of Fowler syndrome. Because of those spasms, I couldn't then get my catheter in, so my bladder was filling. I couldn't really feel how much was in my bladder, but I couldn't get the catheter in to drain it. So it was another trip up to Aimee. This time they did a bladder scan and I believe it showed over a litre. I don't know what the number was, but when they drained my bladder, they found I had 2 litres in my bladder. So it was very dangerous. By the point they were getting to where they were going to catheterize me, I couldn't sit down, I couldn't walk. I was in so much pain that I was just kind of bent over on this bed, but I couldn't move. And I had to say to someone like in the corridor, like, please, can you get someone? I'm in a lot of pain. And they drained my bladder of 2 litres and they were going to just send me home. But a nurse, like a senior nurse, kind of stepped in and said the amount of urine that I had in my bladder could have easily caused kidney damage. You need to be admitted for this. It's very dangerous. So I was admitted and they told me to try self-cathetering again. And I did it while I was on the ward and it got stuck. So I couldn't get it in again, or, once kind of it was stuck, I couldn't get it out. So they'd said, okay, going to do an indwelling catheter. And I had this male urologist come in and went to do this catheter and he put it in the wrong hole. He then blamed the fact that I was too hard to catheterize on the fact that he put it in my vagina instead of my urethra. So his logic was, he said, oh, I'm going to put in a larger catheter, which, I mean, to me, that's not logical, that's illogical. But he said, I will put in a large catheter. So they fit this catheter and my urethral spasms were so bad, I couldn't get out of bed. I was rocking in pain, couldn't really eat because I was in a lot of pain. So the consultant on the ward rounds, who was an absolute legend, he'd said he wasn't willing for me to stay like this. So he'd mentioned about having an emergency suprapubic catheter put in, so the SPC, and that was done the day after. And I was sent home with that.
What a horrific experience. I mean, my head initially was going to you were struggling to catheterize yourself. I mean, you know where the hole is, you know where that catheter's going. And I'm like, was it a case of maybe you needed like a pediatric type of a catheter, a smaller catheter, and
Yeah,
here,
you'd think they'd go down in size. It doesn't really make sense that he went to a larger size, but
absolutely not.
it was confusing to say the least, and especially concerning when this was a senior doctor. This wasn't a junior doctor, kind of your new medical student. This was a senior doctor, and he couldn't put it in the right hole. So it's concerning. It's definitely concerning, but I had the SPC for a total of 18 months in the end,
Wow.
and
And
it was.
how was that? How was that journey with the suprapubic catheter?
The
For
thing is, it's very difficult because when you compare it back, so to the indwelling and the self-catheterizing, it was tenfold a lot better because I wasn't having this severity of urethral spasms that I was having before. But I had had so many infections. I'd had about 35 to 40 different courses of antibiotics last year, so it's 2024. I was having to have my catheter changed about every 5 to 6 weeks because they were getting stuck. So obviously the suprapubic goes through your belly and it goes straight into your bladder. It's held in by a balloon, obviously at the tip of the catheter. When they were trying to change it, they would have to literally like yank on it just to try and get it out, which was traumatic. My anxiety around changes was getting really bad because the changes themselves were very painful. Every time I had a change, it would trigger a big flare up. The flare ups were the minimum lasting for 2 weeks. So, bearing in mind, a change was every, say, 5 weeks, a flare up was for a minimum of 2 weeks. So, it was not sustainable during
How,
that time. Hmm?
how, how was the rest of your life? I mean, you're functioning here as a what, 22-year-old then, you
Yeah,
know,
22-year-old.
living with a superfood catheter. Were you able to go out? Were you able to do things? Were you housebound all of the time?
A lot of the time I was housebound. I like to travel. So as much as my health's a bit pants, I love to travel. So I did do a trip abroad with my catheter, 2 trips abroad with the catheter, which were amazing. But I did, I hadn't been able to work with my health just because my flare-ups were so unpredictable and some days I would be bedbound and my partner would have to help me with just basics like getting washed, getting dressed.
Mhm.
So, some days were slightly better, but my good days weren't good days. If I compared them to my partner, I was never having a good day. I was just having a better day than a bad day. So it was really difficult, kind of even on an emotional level, it was a tube going straight through your belly. Kind of, I I tried to kind of keep very mindful of I don't want to hide this. I shouldn't be ashamed of it. It's nothing to be ashamed of. But I'd had comments from strangers in the street kind of just saying not very nice things. Your body confidence just as a whole, I had this tube. I couldn't so with some catheters, some people have a flip flow on, so kind of basically a tap, you'd empty your bladder as and when, but my bladder didn't cope well with the flip flow. I'd get insane spasms, so I ended up just having it on a free drain bag a lot of the time, and it just affected kind of how I dressed, how I felt,
Mhm.
my life in general, because obviously it's a catheter. I then had to have a night bag, so I wriggle a lot in my sleep and I turn a lot in my sleep. So it's kind of adjusting to there's this long wire that I can't kind of, pull on. I was then having a lot of like leaks. So my confidence was just in the bin, at night time. I was having leaks at like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. So me and my partner would have to get out of bed, strip the bed in, re-put new bedding on, see, get a shower because I was covered in wee. Sometimes my partner would have my urine on him, and it was a lot. As a 22-year-old, you don't really expect kind of to deal with like wet sheets again or, all those things.
Heartbreaks for you. I hate that you've had to go through all of that.
Yeah,
Did
it was just a lot.
did you ever think, or was there a consultant that you came under because you said you'd had the stroke at birth and it led to cerebral palsy?
hmm
Was this cerebral palsy related? Does it tie in with it? I know you've had a diagnosis of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, but
hmm
how do you feel? You know, what does
So
your head
for
and your heart
me,
tell you?
yeah. So for me, kind of with the cerebral palsy, I'd spoke to my consultant about it because kind of that was a thought of mine. Could it be related? Cerebral palsy in itself, as far as like I'm aware and as far as what my consultant said, is not progressive. So, say obviously I struggle with like I have spastic diplegia, so my legs are affected. I could easily get long-term maybe problems with how I walk or whatever, but the actual effects the cerebral palsy has on me shouldn't progress because the damage was caused with the stroke. It's not a progressive problem, it's rather this has happened, this is the result. So the bladder problems wasn't related as far as everyone had kind of said, obviously, and then again, they'd ruled out that it was anything gynecology related, but it took my orthopedic doctor, so the one who dealt with my cerebral palsy, to look at it from a lot like outside perspective. No one was really connecting the dots or even thinking to look at connecting the dots. And he was the one that kind of was like, okay, this could be something to do with your connective tissues rather than just individual problems because I mean my list of diagnoses now are like over 10 problems and that they're all under different specialities, so it wasn't like it's all kind of concentrated in one area. It's all different systems in my body, so he'd said maybe we look at it from a bigger picture and see if you've got a connective tissue problem. So after a year and a maybe half waiting list, I was seen by the geneticist and they'd said that apart from my legs, where they were affected with my cerebral palsy, everywhere else in my body was hypermobile, and no one had picked up on it because everyone was kind of concentrated on my legs are the other way, they don't stretch very well. So, I'd scored max points everywhere else. They then looked at obviously my larger medical history and symptoms and everything else, and it was concluded that I had hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. The problem is for the Fowler syndrome in itself, there's not much research at all. If you try and look for like scholar articles online, you're not finding that many. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome in itself, there's not too much research there either for the form of it I have. So hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, there's still not a genetic test to confirm that diagnosis because they haven't found the correct genetic markers. So we have two very under-researched problems. They just don't know whether they could be linked. They know that with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, a lot of people have an overactive bladder. It's kind of the flip side of it. So they understand there's links with the bladder, so they can kind of take an informed guess. It could be likely that the Fowler syndrome was caused because of that, but no one can really confirm it because there's just not the research there.
So you've had that diagnosis then of the hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos.
Yes.
What then led to you having your urostomy in December 2024?
So obviously I went ongoing with the suprapubic catheter for 18 months. In that time I had a couple more tests. So I'd had a cystoscopy to check if my bladder was irritated from the inside. I had no abnormalities there. I then had something called a urethral pressure profile test, which is basically to test kind of the tightness or spasms in your urethra. So that test for me confirmed my Fowler syndrome. The number it's supposed to be, so it's roughly, give or take, 100 minus your age. So my number at the time should have roughly been about 78. Kind of pressure. Mine was at 185. So over double of what it should have been. And I was then kind of sent to the urologist that I'm under now at Leicester. And I spoke to him, and with all my tests, it was very likely like my bladder just wasn't improving. For Fowler syndrome, there's kind of a couple major treatment options for kind of the more surgical routes. So you have a mitrophonoff, you have an SNS, which is a sacral nerve stimulator, and then you have the urostomy, which is what I had. So for me, my doctor advised against the mitrophonoff because it's a form of stoma, but not how you perceive a normal stoma. So it's a channel made into your bladder that you can pass a catheter in and out of. And it's not like, it doesn't look like a normal stoma. It's just kind of a hole, but it's sealed. and then you'd pass a catheter every time you need to go to toilet. But the problem with me, I didn't feel my bladder, so I had no bladder sensation to know when it was full. And because I'd had a lot of problems with catheterizing, with my bladder spasming, it just was not a great option. Alongside, because of my age, they'd said they ideally only want to do mitral in a lot younger because the children develop a lot better with it. So he just basically said he wasn't really happy for that option. Then for the SNS, because I have cerebral palsy, I have obviously a lot of problems with my limbs.
Mm.
I also have a curved spine. So with the SNS, it goes into your sacral nerve in your spine. A very common, or like very common, at least that I've heard, symptom or side effect can be a lot of people getting pins and needles in their legs, or numbness, or kind of all those related problems. And the fact that I had a spinal problem, I had a leg problem and kind of nerve problems, I didn't feel comfortable going for the SNS. They couldn't really guarantee if my health conditions were like a bad idea to go ahead with, because again, they just didn't know.
Mhm.
So they'd gone to a regional MDT, and I had to get a second opinion just for them to basically confirm that it was the right decision. And then in August, I was confirmed that I would have the urostomy. In October, I was told, yeah, in August, I had a hospital admission, and I saw one of my consultants, and she'd said, yes, we're going to confirm it. We've just got to wait for waiting lists. In October, I got a phone call. They managed to book me in for the 12th of December. So I'd only had a 2-month wait for actually preparing, knowing. So I got to meet the stoma nurses and kind of go through everything. And then on the 12th of December, I had my urostomy.
Did you ever envisage yourself having a stoma or things progressing that far?
I'll be honest with how quickly everything happened. So I remember the date. So I went into retention the 21st of April. And it wasn't even 2 years to the point I had my surgery. So it wasn't really a lot of time to even get your head around things. I mean, I had the suprapubic for the longest amount of time, so I had that for 18 months. So it's very hard because I try to be realistic. I don't want to be pessimistic, but I don't really feel comfortable with what I call toxic positivity. So kind of that idea of just, oh, it'll get better, or, you've got to hold out for it. I'd rather be real with it and like
Mhm.
what is actually the possibilities. Get into the stoma, the lead up, I was a complete mess. I was so confident in the decision, but I was also a mess at the decision because I didn't really know what my life would look like with the stoma. I'd had a lot of conflicting messages, and with the surgery I had, so I had a partial cystectomy. So I had a majority of my bladder removed. I think they said it was about 80%, and they left the very base. And then with the surgery, they took a piece of my small intestine to then attach that to my kidneys, and then that makes the stoma. But I was told, because obviously now my urine's not going into my bladder to then be tunneled out, it's just my kidneys straight out to the stoma. The risk of sepsis is a lot higher, because if I have an infection, I won't be having a UTI, I'll be having a kidney infection straight away.
Mhm.
So it's been very daunting, and kind of that to take in was a lot. I'd never had a major surgery. I mean, my surgery was just under 6 hours. It was open. I also have a lot of medication allergies, so kind of can have paracetamol. At the flip end, I can have ketamine, and there's nothing in between. So post at surgery, they told me I needed to have a epidural, and I didn't want an epidural. And they told me I had to have it, otherwise I wouldn't do the surgery because of my pain. I woke up from surgery and the epidural wasn't in the right place. So my legs were numb, nothing else was numb, so I couldn't move my legs, but my whole abdomen was very painful. So I ended up having ketamine for the first time in ICU, and I was tripping very hard on the ketamine. I was hallucinating. I was just not in a very good place. And just kind of, I look at all of it and it's all happened very quickly to the point it just feels surreal.
Mm.
Like, it's hard to kind of wrap my head around that I'll be like, once I'm older, like in my 70s, 80s, however long I live, like I will be elderly with this stoma and these problems. And it's just kind of been, I've always had health problems, but I feel like I was always a bit in denial with my urology problems for some reason. I think there's a very harsh stigma attached to urology in general, kind of, you think of catheters as old people and you think of incontinence as old people and, all of these things. And it's then been kind of, it felt like chucked in the deep end of, I didn't know anything about this. And it all happened very quickly. So I still feel like there's days where I'll have a good cry because, it feels not unfair, but it's just kind of like it's a lot to go through at my age. I feel like I've aged myself. I feel a lot older than probably what I am because, I've dealt with these things. So I look at 23-year-olds my age and I'm just like, I am not like that. Not at all. So it's a lot to take in, and I don't think you can take it in that amount of time. I think there's been a lot of life changes there to just kind of get over it or at least deal with it better. I mean, I had to drop out of uni because of it. I can't work because of it. So the whole process in itself's just been a lot. So yeah. But my urostomy's been the best thing going forward. I can definitely say that. I guarantee.
Okay. So once you've kind of got through 5 days in ICU and the healing process, I know it took a long time for your wound to heal or whatever. The the upside of that has been good, having urostomy.
A majority, yeah. So I've had one infection that was kind of confirmed post-op, apart from the wound infection. I'm talking about like a kidney infection. There was only one, which has been amazing. They were happening weekly with the suprapubic catheter, so big bonus. However, with my surgery, they left the base of my bladder, so the urethra. Fowler syndrome in itself is a problem with the urinary sphincter not being able to relax. It didn't take it out. So, kind of on the months recovering, my urethral spasms came back really badly. And the pain was just awful. I was kind of going back to being a bit like bedbound again. And
Okay.
it was a lot to take in. And I'd had an admission in January because I just wasn't very well. And I believe it was March, April, I had my follow-up with my urology consultant. And I said to him, I was like, these spasms are ongoing. Could they not have removed my urethra? Like, why hadn't they done that? And my hospital that I'm under weren't willing to remove it. They only remove it in cancer patients. Not every hospital is this way, but that was just the way mine was. And he'd kind of explained because of where your urethra sits, by removing it, they could have easily caused damage to sexual organs. My vagina could have been shortened. There's a lot of problems there that they weren't really willing to touch. But he'd also said he thought I now had complex pelvic pain syndrome. So he was worried, or he is worried, that this is now a kind of a chronic lifelong pain. My local pain team rejected the referral because they said I was way too complex. So my consultant said he knew a very good consultant in Leicester who deals with pain management. So I'm currently waiting to be referred to a pain consultant because I think they'd explained there's a way they can like kind of burn the nerves in the urethra for
Yeah.
pain management. So he'd said about that. And then I've also now got to go to pelvic floor physio because again, they're hoping that might help. So I can't lie and be like, oh, it's been plain sailing. But I can also say I'm very glad I had it done.
Mhm.
When I look back, my quality of life is better with the urostomy. I'm not having to deal with the traumatic changes. My anxiety is a lot lower because, again, I'm not having to go through those. I would say my pain is somewhat lower. It's not always. If my spasms are playing up,
Mhm.
I'm in a lot of pain, but I'm not having the infections like I did. Like all of those things, I can't complain about my urostomy, even down to like my confidence has felt a lot better because with the suprapubic, everything was very visible.
Yes. Yes.
And now with the stoma, obviously, it's contained to the stoma bag.
Mhm.
I choose to have opaque bags just because it helps me feel a bit more confident, and my confidence is a lot better since my surgery. I can't say I like my scar too much at the minute, but that's all part of acceptance, I think. But I feel a lot better in terms of bigger picture. I can do a lot more that I couldn't have done with my catheter. So it's one of those. It's not been plain sailing, and I don't know. I don't think there's such a thing as I'd recommend it because obviously, if I could have gone for the other options, but were slightly less invasive, it probably would have been, could have been better. It might not have been, but just it was very traumatic, the whole experience. Surgery is not nice. ICU is not nice. Um, so yeah, I've had a lot of trauma come from it, but I'd say I'm happy with the decision. I don't regret it. So
And part of
positive.
me thinks as well, if you had have had the microphonus or the sacral nerve stimulator, you know, would that have just been another temporary thing on the way to you maybe having a urostomy, you know?
It depends. It is so dependent. So I know a couple of people who have had the SNS and they had they did have results to begin with, and then as their health progresses or as time goes on, their bladder just stops working again. Some people have had the SNS, and with the SNS, you have it in two stages. You have a trial, and then if that works, you go on to the permanent. I heard of a lot of people who had it done who it just didn't work. Or if it did work, it wasn't a long term picture.
And were those people that also had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or any of the, you know,
So as far as I'm aware, I don't know. I don't think so. But as with having the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, my diagnosis is only new, so I had the diagnosis happen after surgery. I got diagnosed in March.
Mhm.
Ehlers-Danlos syndrome in itself, because it's a problem with the connective tissue, healing can be a problem, as well as just obviously all your connective tissues aren't working the same. So any procedures you have done, they're likely not going to react the same as if you had, a non-connective tissue problem. So from what I've heard with the SNS, people who have had it with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, it's a lot more likely to dislodge or move, which would then mean it would just probably not work. So in hindsight, it's a great thing that I didn't go for that because it's a lot more likely it would have failed anyway because of this new diagnosis. Some people it just stops working. Some people it just doesn't work. Full stop. Um, it doesn't seem like there's too much rhyme or reason, but I'm a person, I like research, I like to read, I like learning scientific things, and there's just not enough to read up on with it. Fowler syndrome, I believe, was first founded in 1985. It was in the 80s. So it's a very relatively new found condition. It was founded by Professor Fowler. Absolutely amazing woman. I've had to meet her, which was such a blessing. She was lovely. But it is such a new condition. There's just not enough research on all of it. Like the SNS has been proven to work for some people, but again, your maximum, you've got 40 years of research. In the
Mm.
grand scheme of things, that's nothing. Like to track progress in someone, you there's just not enough time. You've probably got a maximum of like a 10, 20 year span you can track someone, but would there have even been the idea of having research then for it? Probably not. So yeah, it's very difficult. I feel with Fowler syndrome because there's just not enough research, not enough people know the right things to do. The consultants, I had to go out to county for a specialist because there wasn't one local. Even the ones that are more specialist in it, they don't know all the answers for it. So they can kind of say, we think this would be a good treatment option, we think this would be a good treatment option, but no one really knows just because it's not happened enough and it's not gone on long enough. So I know people who have got on with the mitrophin off amazing and they've had Fowler syndrome and that's their new normal and that's a longer term option. Same with the SNS. It can be a longer term option if it works for people. But on the flip side, it doesn't work for some people. And you're then going through multiple different procedures to try and find a result to kind of stick.
Mhm.
So for a lot of people, it's a long process and it's not necessarily guaranteed to work. So it's very difficult.
Because of the lack of research and information there, that's led to part of you starting to share your journey publicly. What was behind your thought process then of like going on to Instagram and TikTok to share your journey?
Yeah, I think for me, I like to be informed. So before surgery or if I got a diagnosis or whatever, I like to research it as much as I can. And social media was a great place to be able to look at other people and go, okay, this is their experience. You can't ever compare two experiences because people are different, but it's always good to know a rough idea, at least for me. I like to know the ins and outs of things. So I knew that I was taking in that information, and I also know that I'm an open book. So it was just kind of one of those things where I was very happy to share it because if it can help one person, my negatives have turned into a positive. It's amazing. And I've had, a lot of messages that I'm very thankful for of people going, because of what you've posted, I've gone to seek help, or because of what you've posted, I feel less alone, or, people just reaching out going, oh, I've had this problem. What do you think? And it's like, obviously, I can't give medical advice, but I can also go, this is my story. I've been able to point people to other people I know who share their stories and be like, actually, maybe look more towards this person because they're going down that avenue or kind of all those different things. I mean, I've always been very open to raising awareness of things. When I was younger, I'd appeared on BBC Northampton radio to talk about mental health awareness. When I was younger, I used to do public speaking on mental health awareness. So I've always enjoyed kind of talking about things and being open about things. And I just wanted a positive to come out of everything that had happened. And I feel like in a roundabout way, it kind of helped all of this help me find a purpose with it, which again, it's nice to have the negatives turn into positives. And I think, it's important not to be too negative on your health or try not to dwell too much because you can kind of get stuck in that very deep, dark hole of that, negative cycle. But in the same vein, just by being open about it, I feel like I found a bit more confidence in it. And it's just, yeah, I found a bit of a purpose, which has been weird to kind of, all of this has turned into a good thing. But I mean, I'm looking at hopefully I want to start a brand that I've got in the pipelines. And, I'm going to some events now and all these different things. And it's like these wouldn't have happened if I had my problems. In the same vein, I probably wouldn't have done social media like I did because of these problems. I now do kind of volunteering or part-time stuff of doing social media work, which I absolutely love, which has been fueled by a lot of what I post. So it's been an amazing turnaround.
Absolutely incredible. Incredible.
Thank you.
And it's all down to acceptance of
Yeah.
this is where I'm at, this is what I'm living with.
Exactly. I think I always said I'm very much fake it till you make it. So some of the stuff I posted, like when I had my suprapubic catheter, I posted some bikini photos because I felt so unconfident that I thought, oh, if I can actually fake confidence, maybe it will turn up a bit. And it did. So on the surface, obviously, I think social media, I tried to be as transparent as possible, but there are points where I think by trying to fake my confidence, it actually turned into confidence.
I love that. Um, it's also like a little way of therapy, but
Exactly.
watching and seeing how far you've come in your journey.
It's nice because it's like a little like a diary. Obviously, yeah,
Yeah.
you go through it all, and I actually vlogged my urostomy experience. So I don't majorly do YouTube for myself. Me and my partner have a YouTube channel.
Mhm.
But for my health, I thought I wanted to record my urostomy journey because there isn't actually a lot online about urostomies, especially kind of for women. There wasn't a lot of information at all for women with urostomies. A lot more of it was for men. And obviously, kind of that whole thing of being younger and whatever. And I tried looking on YouTube for some vlogs of the urostomy surgery or like the process because I didn't really know what I was getting myself in for, like into. And I just couldn't find it. So I thought, okay, I'll record mine then and I'll post it because I knew that I was looking for it. So I can't be the only one that kind of thinks that way. So I uploaded a vlog of my experience and I think it's on like 600 views at the minute. A lot of
Cool.
people have said it's helpful. So, I mean, it's
Yeah.
been great.
So you're going to send me the link to that so I can also tag that below in the show notes so that
Yeah,
people can get a direct link to YouTube to go and follow along and watch that journey. It's super helpful. And we create these videos and share stuff, and we share our stories to help one person at a time, but it actually has a ripple effect
it does. It
from
does.
person. So yeah.
It's so important. And I think, when you look at kind of the older generation, a lot more of them are very standoffish when it comes to medical conditions or, as you go back in time, was a lot more taboo, or you didn't show these things because it was a lot more, you didn't speak about it. Your issues were behind closed doors, and I think it's very important even for an older generation to see, as well as a younger generation, that it is okay to have these problems and not hide them.
Yeah. Well, that's why we have a stigma around stomas and, a stigma
Exactly.
around we can't talk about poop or our bladder, that's why we're living in a society where it is a stigma, you know.
Yeah,
So it is important to kind of flip the switch and change our views on it to if you don't change, nothing will ever change. If we don't start to
exactly.
change,
Yeah,
nothing will ever change. So yeah, about
exactly. I think that was just what was most important. Just it is a ripple effect, and kind of going on to stigma, urology conditions in particular, they are so stigmatized. You try and find you get the leaflets in your hospital about these conditions or treatments, whatever. You cannot find anything urology related that's got someone in their 20s on it. Not at all. You're probably looking at 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. You looked at, any information I said for the urostomy. Every document that I looked at was about men with a urostomy. I couldn't find anything to do with women with urostomies. When it comes to catheters, you aren't seeing anything about younger women having them. All of these things and kind of the questions that I was looking for, even when it came to like your sexual health, everything's related to men's health. You can't find anything to do with women's health when it comes to that. Like everything to do with urology I've found is just so stigmatized and it's just not spoken enough from a kind of a younger perspective or a female perspective or kind of going back onto that thought of you when you picture catheters, you picture older people. Any age can have a catheter. There's no age limit. I've had nurses tell me before, like, oh, you're too young to have a catheter. That's not a thing that can't happen. It's just a medical intervention. It's not an age limit. And, by being able to share some of this stuff, even if it's people who are not directly affected by a urology problem, I hope that it at least raises a bit of awareness of actually this isn't just an elderly problem or this isn't just a male problem, and just sharing a bit more information on it because there just isn't enough.
I love that you've also, we'll give Salt Healthcare a wee plug here because we can. I love that you've joined the Salt team recently. You've become one of our advocates, and that, yeah, we will see your face, no doubt, and your age being broadcasted with urostomy.
Yes.
We are going to change things. Things are going to very much be different in the future. Um,
Yeah, I hope so.
Advocates, people who are willing to put their face out there, put their story out there, and show that this is not something that old people just go through. That
Yeah. I think it's just important for a lot more people to know also it's not something you should hide, because that's always a common kind of conversation of like, oh, why would you want that on show? Or, you get internet trolls, that's the thing. And, a lot of people aren't very happy with either you showing the stoma or scars or any of those things. But I mean, I need this to live. I don't want to be ashamed of something that's keeping me well, or at least alive, because I try not to think too much into it. But the way I was going with infections, I could have easily went septic because my antibiotics I was starting to become resistant. If I had carried on with the suprapubic catheter, I don't know how much worse my infections could have progressed. And it could have easily got to a point where they couldn't treat the infection, and we've just got to deal with basically waiting for if it could have gone septic. And that's very daunting. And I now have my stoma and I'm dealing with it so much better. And it's like that has helped me live a better life, and it could have been life-saving. We don't know the ins and outs, but it very much could have been. Why should I be ashamed of that? If anything, I'd want to celebrate that.
well, has absolutely given you quality of life. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Amy, it's been so great to have you on here chat with us today. It's been absolutely so not you threw out so much knowledge there at me. I'm just like soaking it
Yeah.
all in. Yeah, you're just going to impact that ripple effect, one person after one person. Um,
I hope so.
Story. So it's been amazing. Is there anything else that you want to touch on, or any other information you want to drop out there? If there's one person listening, 22-year-old
Um,
female in the same situation.
I would like to just drop a cheeky little plug for Fowler Syndrome UK. So I have had a lot of help through that charity, and I now volunteer with the charity. They are amazing. They're the only charity in the world for Fowler syndrome. And they talk with Professor Fowler herself. That's how I met her, through a charity event. And, just on Fowler syndrome, the age of onset is roughly the average age of onset's in your 20s. And this is a problem that, the estimated number to begin with, I believe, was 2 in a million. They know the number's a lot higher, but they just don't know the ins and the outs. And I think it's just very important to kind of talk about these problems because it is a rare condition. And a lot of women are gaslit into thinking that their problems could be anxiety, or it could be, all of these different things. And I think the most important thing from all of it for me is, if you have a problem and you have a gut feeling of something isn't right, you need to chase that gut feeling, because kind of, as I said, I had one doctor tell me that it wasn't real. I went through lots of different consultants. As I said, there was a consultant who didn't know how to catheterize me, so I was blamed, and it was basically go up a size. Medical gaslighting can be a very real thing, and especially in women, it's kind of seen that women are medically gaslit a lot more. And just, if you have a problem and you have that gut feeling of something isn't right, you need to follow your gut, because I did with my Fowlers. And, I can't lie, probably a bit of my persistence did help with me getting treatment quicker, maybe because I was pushing and I was asking those questions. So if there is anyone out there who is struggling, and it doesn't even have to be related to Fowlers, it could be a bowel problem, it could be a gynae problem, whatever it is, like if you have that deep down feeling of something isn't right and no one's listening, you need to just keep pushing because there will be someone who will listen. It just might be time. But yeah.
Aimee, thank you so much, guys. Aimee's handle will be shared here below. It is No Bladder Babe on Instagram and TikTok. I will also share the links to her YouTube journey below in the show notes. Again, with Fowlers UK,
Yes.
Fowlers Syndrome UK charity below that you can go over and look at those links and read all the information. Remember, we're just sharing our own personal experiences with you today. We're not professionals, so like Aimee has said, if you think there is something, go and seek that medical professional help. As always, but advocate for yourself. Aimee, again, thank you so
A
much.
pleasure.
Really enlightening having you with us here today. So thank you very much.
Thank
Guys,
you.
that's it for today. Do come back next week to join us for another episode. But for now, it's over and out from Aimee and myself. Thank you, Aimee.
Thank you.